They got Willa. They got my daughter. I need to find her.
From acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson.
You can save that girl.
Today, experience what is being called the best movie of the year.
This is the end of the line.
Not for you.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity.
Let's go!
One battle after another. Now playing only in theaters. Experience it in IMAX. Rated R. Under 17 animated without parent.
You can't hide.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to the Super Rugby Cymru podcast.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Super Rugby Cymru podcast. It's a little bit different this week. There are two of us. It's myself, Double R, but I'm joined by the Welsh Rugby Union's Head of Player Development, John Alder. John, how are we doing?
Very well, mate. Delighted to be here and chatting with you today.
It's coming towards the end of the season. Sort of thoughts so far on the inaugural Super Rugby Cymru season?
Yeah, well, I think first thing for everyone involved, both us from a governing body perspective, but also all the club's players, coaches, all the support staff. I think they should all be very proud of sort of this inaugural season. I think we were stepping into a bit of an unknown. It was quite a lengthy process in the build-up and recognising that both for the fans, for the clubs, but also wider player development and the game in Wales, we wanted a really thriving semi-professional tier of rugby. And I think perhaps over the last 10 years, the old Indigo Premiership had probably not been given the love it deserved. So it's been it was a long road to get into the start point of the season, and now we're heading towards the back end. We're in the playoffs, and I think where's the year gone? But generally really pleased. I think there's lots of things we'll look at in the post-season. We're going to try and improve the competition year on year so that it delivers the outcomes that we're all aiming for, which is high quality playing experiences, great competition, competitive games for people to watch, and the opportunity for young players to be tested. But so we'll continue to sort of iterate it year on year. But I think generally we're really pleased.
Obviously, you've been at quite a few games recently. Obviously, SRC had you on with Lauren the other day. You enjoying the games so far and sort of getting out of the action?
I've done my best to get to at least one game a week and try to visit all the clubs. It's a great opportunity for me to spend some time with their chair, committee, coaches to really understand how they're finding things. But all the games I've been to, like the wildcard game last week went right down to the wire. Could have easily gone into extra time. And that's exactly the sort of games that we want to see. Previous week it was one on the last kick of the game. I know there was a couple of games that finished like that where it's been sort of right down to the wire, and I've really enjoyed getting out and seeing it, and I suppose that's the nice part, is when you get to see stuff brought to life that was sort of plans on a page 2 years ago, and a bit of a leap of faith and pursuing a vision with people.
And I guess that's sort of a difficult year. This wasn't sort of a sort of snap decision or something that sort of a sort of transition from the old sort of Premiership. This has been a couple of years in the making, a lot of sort of decisions to make around the sort of the size of the sort of the league and all of that. Has it gone better than you sort of thought it would for its inaugural season? Or?
Good question. I probably went in with an open mind. I think we've started with a set of principles, and some of those principles were condensing talent, strong working relationships between the pro clubs and the affiliate SRC clubs as kind of foundational principle. Game time opportunity for allocated academy players, Equally, a really aspirational competition to play in for semi-pro players as well. So kind of went in with those principles. Work with the referees department around how the game's reffed, so that they ref it in a way that is going to mean it moves more towards what we see on the pro stage. Both was great for players and hopefully good for fans, and alongside that, coaches working in a way, coaching a game that is more in keeping with the pro game. So would I say it's gone as I expected or as I hoped? Probably as I hoped rather than as I expected, because I think these things can always they're never a straight line, they're always sort of bumps in the road and things that surprise you really pleasingly, and then there's a little bump somewhere else. So, but generally, really pleased. It's gone as I would have hoped, and I think we've got a really good platform off this pilot year, this foundation, this inaugural year, to look at where do we want to take it next.
Obviously, on the sort of the wild card game last week, you mentioned that game time for under 20s was up 70%, and the starts for those players was again up around 70%. So how is it sort of planned out on the player development sort of side of it? Is it tracking ahead of sort of the strategic approach, and sort of is the data sort of supplying that sort of positive feedback that you need as well?
Yeah, I mean, and we only looked predominantly in the first instance at our under-20s players going into the Six Nations. Now there's a whole load of work we'll need to do once the season's finished, looking at all clubs, all allocated players, other metrics like average age. So we need to have a proper look at it there to come up with a really robust report on the season. But the under-20s data was really positive. And I chatting with Rich Whiffin, he's got a real strong belief that definitely played a part in how well the 20s did this year. We had the best under-20 Six Nations since sort of the late 2010s, and with a win against England, win against Ireland, he really feels really strongly that is built on high quality game time before Christmas, not just the minutes but starts, but also how competitive the games have been. We haven't seen any real whitewashes between the teams. We've seen quite a lot of high scoring games, but I think back to a game in the pre-Christmas period where Pontypool played RGC and it was something like 64-48. It almost felt like going back to Super 12 days where you get those really high score lines. We did bring in the the extra bonus point for winning by 15 points or more, so there was extra incentives there, I suppose, for teams to play an attacking style of try-scoring rugby. And hopefully that's all played out in the way the game's been played, the way the players are playing, the way the coaches are thinking about the game. So back to, in terms of how it's planned out with player development, I think a key sort of vision with the league was, if we look at really successful, competitive, profitable professional leagues around the world, they're generally underpinned by whether it's a feeder system or a underpinning competition. So my former world in rugby league, the NRL had the New South Wales Cup, which was a semi-pro league that would underpin, and each pro NRL club had their various either affiliates or a single club that they would farm players out to or recruit players from. So I suppose that's kind of the vision at heart for the SRC, and the importance of the working relationship with the regions. And they've all engaged in a memorandum of understanding as an associate affiliate club of a pro club, and vice versa. And that starts right back in practically in the sort of pre-season, where they would sit down with a player allocation process, and the pro clubs, the regions, do have autonomy in terms of how they manage that. Most of lent really strongly on where players are from is probably a first principle. So that players will be allocated to where, first and foremost, where they're from, the opportunity to play for their hometown club. Now obviously talent isn't distributed evenly, so that does see sort of slightly different distributions of talent, but the importance of that young players having the opportunity to play for their home club. And from there they'll also allocate based on positional shortages and need. And I know some clubs will, where players become available during the season, they'll almost have a weekly kind of draft of, okay, we've got these players available, would you like? So that starts in the pre-season, and then at a very individual player level, like, okay, we would like this player to play this many games, we think this is where they're best suited to play, and a discussion with the coaches around how that works. And that's kind of agreed up front, and then it plays out through the season. We can't control for things like injuries. Generally, rule of thumb is that at any given time, 25% of a pro team are injured, and that probably applies to the academies as well. So whilst there's a set allocation to start season, obviously those numbers ebb and flow through the season based on pro call-ups, URC call-ups, and we've seen a handful of our young players making debuts in the URC this year, and then injuries as well. Or equally, up and coming sort of 18-year-olds. We've seen a couple of 18-year-olds make debuts in the SRC this year, deliberately planned as, okay, how do we expose you to sort of adult rugby? How do you make that leap out of age grade rugby, where you're possibly one of the biggest, fastest, best players on the pitch? How do we make that transition and manage that transition? So whilst there's sort of an overarching helicopter view between the pro club academies and the regional academies and the SRC clubs, it's then managed almost on a weekly basis and an individual player plan perspective.
Obviously, like I said, you're never going to get, due to the sort of the different sort of aspects you're going to look at for player allocation and exact allocation across all clubs, and sometimes it appears somewhat imbalanced. But is that something that the sort of the union gets involved with and sort of says, can we look at a more balanced, or can we sort of say for say the Dragons, you've got three clubs, and add some sort of directive to say we need a bit more even, where perhaps over the last 5 years it's been centred around perhaps one club or the other?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly in conversation with the regional academies about how they manage their allocation process. We're very mindful of obviously wanting them to feel like they've got autonomy to make the right decisions based on their players and their philosophies and their principles. And again, because of geographical centres, talent's not distributed evenly. But what we are really interested in is the quality of the relationship held between. So our role perhaps is in ensuring there's a quality of relationship, and if there isn't, then we would sort of step in and try and mediate that. One of the big sort of signals for me is, if I'll always check in with the regional academies if they're happy, if they're comfortable. I suppose two of our regional academies have a slightly trickier time because they've got 3 clubs to service or work with. Whereas others will have 2 and a couple only have 1, which again, the more relationships, the more complex it can get. But we mainly step in around the quality of the relationship, or if we start to become aware that parties aren't happy or aren't comfortable and that sort of thing. Generally, I suppose rugby's intense and emotional, so it's never going to be sort of all smooth sailing, but generally on balance, there's a real positive feeling amongst the regional academies and the SRC clubs. But it does ebb and flow on a week-to-week basis, so some weeks you might see the presence of more regional players, some you might see less, and that's kind of just part of the course.
Obviously, what has changed around the structure this season, for those who may not know, is it's gone from being underneath the community game board to the professional game board. The calendar aligns with the professional season, so obviously it maximises the game time for the under-20s, those in the academy that are sort of into the sort of the pro season. Those sort of players on the pro circuit who are fringe or sort of getting the injuries can sort of maximise their game time. But sort of what has the feedback been, not just on player development, but overall from sort of the clubs, but also sort of the regions here in terms of how they feel that this is sort of bridging the gap that was probably lacked in Wales for quite some time?
Yeah, I think Lance Bradley was interviewed on S4C last week and spoke really positively about his experiences, observations as chief executive of the Ospreys and the relationship with their 3 affiliate clubs. Like I said, everyone's generally very positive. You've seen a high, again, it's slightly easier for someone like the Scarlets because they're only working with 2 partners, but like a really high volume of players playing at Llandudno that are attached to the Scarlets, whether they are senior squad players, whether they're senior academy players, or whether they're emerging from their age grade. And then you've got other examples of dual contract players that are engaged with the Ospreys and Aberavon, who wouldn't necessarily be regional senior players, but they're on a dual contract, so they're available for training with the Ospreys. They could be available for selection if it comes up. Generally very positive.
And obviously, as with any sort of system or structure that's new in place, is going to be tinkering I guess changes just to some sort of degree. Is there anything that you've already taken from this season that you're going to be looking to change, or what sort of changes sort of you looking to make ahead of sort of next year's sort of structure?
Well, linking back to the previous question in terms of sort of general feelings amongst our pro clubs, we've seen they've all approached it slightly differently, but I've seen this year a stronger support and profile given to the SRC clubs by the pro region. So I know the Dragons have been really vocal on social media regarding promoting players and the success of their 3 affiliate clubs, as of the Ospreys. The Ospreys did their pre-season sort of 3-way playing opportunity at the Liberty, which again was great. As I understand, the players love that, and it was a really great way to start the season and demonstrate how the Ospreys are working with their 3 clubs. I think the Scarlets played Command and Quins pre-season as a pre-season game, so they're all examples of how the regions are getting behind this, and also recognising the invaluable role their affiliate clubs play in the whole ecosystem in the area. You know, there should be flagships for rugby alongside the pro club. So in terms of looking forward, you know, I think I'd hope to see even more things like that moving forward. I think it was a really nice touch part through the season where the club started recognising the regional players on their roster or on their team sheets. It's really visual for everyone to see. And equally, if we don't see any regional players, it's an opportunity for me to have a conversation as to, you know, is everything kind of working as you want between all parties. So look, whether there's activation that can be done pre-season, whether that's playing opportunities, what can be promoted through all parties. I think looking forward, we're working hard to secure a title partner for next season. That was probably one thing that was missing from this inaugural season, was a clear commercial title partner. So we are working hard at that at the moment, and we'd look to make announcements in the off-season around that. From a structural perspective, we work with the clubs to get their feedback on how they found the rhythm of the season, both from a playing perspective, but also from fans and members. Recognising, I think I mentioned on my interview last week with S4C, we've been in long conversations with the RFU around an Anglo-Welsh Cup, which would take place in the international breaks. That was going very positively, and we were under the impression it was sort of signed off for next year up until January, and then due to the well-publicised conflicts between the RFU, some of their clubs, their board, council, etc., they put a block on that for this season. So what it does mean is we've got another year of our domestic cup to look at, so we want to look at that format. And I think general feedback was sort of the week on, week off probably lost a bit of momentum through the cup, so I think we'll address that and have a much more sort of condensed cup. I think there'll be opportunities for some form of playoffs and finals and tiering within the cup, so clubs are getting games, players are getting opportunity, but also there's always something to play for. I think that was one big principle, looking at how do we make this really exciting to watch, great to play and great to coach, great to be part of, is, you know, jeopardy, competitiveness. So like I said, we brought in the wildcard playoff games this year, which isn't necessary to everyone's taste because it does move away a little bit from the importance of the league. But through that process, every team in the comp will in essence get a high jeopardy playoff game. You know, and that's a great experience for players. You know, that game that Swansea and Bridgend played last week, for those players on the pitch, learning to win a game that has a real consequence under pressure. We get to, in essence, recreate that every week now through to the final, pretty much. So that was a key feature, but looking to see how we bring more of that in. We'll look at the additional bonus point that we brought in this year and see, you know, general feedback from coaches and players, they like that. I don't know whether we would look at any other sort of incentivising for points within the league, but there are other options. I know in France they have a bonus point for a smaller losing margin than what we currently offer, but there's things we could look at like that, but they're not necessarily as high priority for us. I think we'll look to finish the season slightly earlier, and again this year the grand final being at the stadium was out of the question due to the European Cup. We are committed to try and bring at least one of the flagship finals, whether that's the cup or ideally the grand final, because we've tried to organise the season around. There are 3 things to win. There's the Challenge Shield, which Evervale won this year, unbelievable achievement from them, unbeaten at home. You know, that's a record in itself. Like, that's something to be celebrated, which is why we wanted to bring that Challenge Shield in. So those games matter. You know, rarely is there a league game which doesn't have something on it. So the Challenge Shield, you've got the cup, and obviously the main sort of competition final. So we are committed to bringing that to a premier venue, ideally here at the Principality, and we will be looking to finish the season slightly earlier, so it doesn't feel quite so long for fans and players. We're working with S4C regarding continued broadcast. Some of the details we'll need to work out, but hopefully, I mean, from what I've watched, and I'm hoping the listeners have enjoyed when they've watched it online, it's a really strong profile. From speaking with the championship clubs in England, that was one of the main things that they were desperately jealous of us. there's weekly profile on the most part of a game, that clubs, players, coaches get a profile on live TV or on stream with great commentary, with great guests and pundits. So I think, part of our ongoing relationship with S4C and the production team there, looking to go, how do we take this on to the next level?
And obviously, you mentioned it there. So it is the championship clubs in England that you were looking for sort of a competition with. That's obviously going to be on hold now, and obviously the schedule is probably the one thing I think that's probably caused more noise than anything else. In fairness, I think it's always good that there's now going to be sort of feedback around that is being listened to, which is obviously the major part. That's stakeholders across the game have definitely sort of missed out, I guess. But the structure will largely stay the same. Obviously, there will be tweaks to sort of improve that. I'm gathering that we're going to see the same clubs. Let's say 10 clubs next year. Obviously, there's no promotion relegation, but everyone had to fulfil the criteria. I'm assuming that that's all okay at the moment. Obviously, the recent news around Cardiff being overtaken by the union themselves, that's not going to affect.
No. So the same 10 clubs, they've all got a license for 3 years for the competition. And I think that stability is a good thing, and that's why we're not going to be changing anything drastically. It's refinements and tweaking to make it a better experience for everybody, but nothing fundamentally different, because that stability then allows clubs, fans, players, coaches to become, these are the parameters we're working in. Okay, so how do we work to be able to go and win this thing? If we're changing things every season, it makes it unstable for everybody. So that will remain largely the same. The conversations are still ongoing with the RFU and the championship clubs. They have picked back up again, but obviously we've missed a window for this season. So what we do want to do is make the cup this next year as interesting and as exciting as possible. There's a great window of time during the Six Nations where there's obviously uplift of players into the national squad, there's uplift of players into the under-20s. There is an element of European Cup rugby and URC rugby happening through it, so there's pressure on senior squads. And I know that some SRC clubs did use the cup as an opportunity to bring under-18s in, which is a really nice touch. You think in terms of the different phases of the season, what did the different elements of the season bring? That's probably a great opportunity to start to begin to give experience to sort of either fringe players, to give them a shot, or bring up and coming 18-year-olds into the competition to give them that first taste of, okay, you want to make the leap out of age grade rugby, this is what it looks and feels like. Yeah, and obviously there's 2 years left on the 3-year cycle, of course, that sort of all the clubs have sort of signed up for, I guess. Are there ongoing sort of discussions with those in the Premiership that may be interested in coming in, or when would those sort of discussions, and when would the process start, I guess, in terms of applications and the sort of the expression of interests going in for, let's say 3 years' time, that sort of 4th season of the SRC as it would be? Is that sort of something that's ongoing, or will it be picked up? No, we've kind of taken a pause on some of those sort of thoughts and ideas at this stage, and I must say, from what I can tell and from what colleagues have fed back, the Admiral Community Premiership's been really competitive this season. I think it was a great game, it sounds like last night, between Ponty and Neath, and that's a good thing too. Like, a really competitive community premiership is a good thing as well. So any change, nothing has, everything's connected to everything. So if you change things on the right, it affects things on the left. So we would hate to then destabilise that, as well as that's bedding in and the new community sort of pyramid structure is bedding in. So we probably won't start looking at things like that for another 6 months. But that being said, 3 years can go by quickly, so we would certainly need to start considering if there were either an expansion of the competition or a changing of the teams, then or an application process. We need to consider that sort of 18 months out from when it would happen, so which would be 6 months from now. So it's not too far away, but we haven't really considered any of that yet. The biggest challenge from a scheduling point of view is there's only so many weeks in the year, and if we want this to run integrated with the pro calendar, and we want a coherent competition, where it makes sense, and there is a constraint on how many weeks of the year. I think we look at the pressure that the Storms put on us this year. I can't remember how many games we had rearranged, but that put a considerable amount of pressure on the calendar in order to complete the season by the league deadline before we get into the playoffs. And I know that left a couple of teams facing sort of 3 games in 8 or 9 days, which isn't ideal, but that's kind of where we ended up. So if there are more teams, that pressure becomes even greater, and we run the risk of, well, I know community leagues in the past have finished into June because of things like that. So we've got to be mindful of that with scheduling.
Yeah, like you said, it's great now that we've got this weekend, Llandovery and Pontypool's game is actually on S4C, the TV channel, rather than sort of being broadcast on sort of outer platforms. You know, is that something we can look forward to now in the semi-final final, do you know, in terms of it's going to be on the main channel?
Yeah.
And then...
So I think, and obviously the S4C are constrained by their broadcast schedule, but when there's an availability on live TV, they put the SRC on live TV. So I think the two Christmas games that were either side of Christmas, New Year, they were on linear TV. The quarter, semi and final will also be on linear TV. I think the opening game of the season might have been on linear TV as well. So they do work really hard to try and put it on live TV when they can. So yeah, that's exciting that the final 3 rounds of the league are on. Oh, sorry, the competition. Shouldn't call it the league. The competition are on live TV.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned there's a few sort of things to still sort of work out with S4C. They've obviously had a big rights sort of change around the URC and the sort of the pro clubs, and what they've lost there means that they've probably got more open slots to sort of broadcast, I guess, the SRC. Is that something you're going to sort of look at and say, can we get a broadcast deal that maybe sort of increased on what it sort of is now, and then obviously you get it on sort of the linear channel rather than sort of the outlying broadcast? Is that something that you would look for sort of ongoing? On
a personal level, of course, and we definitely champion, and we'd want to do the best thing by the clubs, the competition, and the players. But we haven't had any conversations with S4C yet, because I think that's a moving beast too, with the BBC announcement regarding the URC. But I think I'm hoping one nice addition this season has been the highlight show on a Tuesday night, and the production team have been sending out single cameras to other games, so it's not like it's just one game a week. It is actually highlights of other games on good quality coverage as part of the highlight show, which hopefully has felt like it's a nicer element to the week as well, and greater, broader exposure to all games, not just the game that's been covered live.
Yeah, I guess that's the sort of the difficult thing that people, there's obviously limited resources that Wispo run the sort of the technical production side of S4C's broadcast and linking in with the BBC. But I guess that's the one good thing I think that we definitely need with the league is sort of that weekly coverage, not just with a live game, but as you say, sort of the weekly coverage of a live highlight show, sort of like a bit of a magazine sort of setup sort of thing as we used to see on sort of Scrum 5, sort of 5-10 years ago, and sort of that aspect of it, and that sort of side of it's been probably sorely missed for quite a while. Obviously the Twitter account shares weekly highlights as well of all the games, of obviously the tries, and that's always great for the promotion of the game. And sort of is the uptake increased on what it was last year in terms of sort of like online viewers? Do we have any sort of data on if crowds in person are sort of increased as well in terms of what the SRC has seen?
Yeah, in terms of the consumption, the initial figures shared by S4C were really promising. They were blown away by how many people watched the games over Christmas, on live TV. And what's been quite interesting is the age profile of people watching the SRC on YouTube. For particularly 16 to 20 year olds is really high, and what the feedback from S4C was that actually bucks the trend in terms of the generally being an older demographic watching domestic rugby. I can't speak for the URC because I don't know those figures, but generally an older demographic. But then you've got this group of 16 to 20 year olds who are watching the SRC on YouTube, which probably also highlights, as much as there's value profile from live TV and traditional coverage, there's clearly appetite and consumption of young people, which is probably something I'm in conversations with the clubs and our internal colleagues around how and it's probably a challenge for the whole game at large, how we engage with younger populations, younger groups of people, and it's been really encouraging of the games I've attended. I think I was at a game in Newport back in the autumn, and the volume of young people there, like teenagers and young children, often with perhaps parents, but that was really positive. It was really refreshing to see, because it does buck the trend of, it's only older generation watching rugby, but that's definitely something to go after, because that's our future market, that's our future whether it's future players, future fans, it's, you know, future sponsors, etc. So generally very positive. Again, we'll wait till they get to the end of the season to get all of the broadcast figures and who's consuming the content. But yeah, generally positive, and I'm really pleased about that. In terms of people through the gates, like I said, I've been to most of the TV games and chatted to players. I was chatting to a player last week, actually, one of the captains of one of the 10 SRC teams, and he said like the people through the gates on the TV games, even on a Thursday night, which I know is quite it's different to the traditional slot on a Saturday. He said he looks up in the stands when he's playing, and he doesn't notice any difference from a Saturday. You know, and the benefit, he said, from a playing perspective, is he gets a weekend's break. You know, so generally, yeah, I think the crowds have been good. Again, we'll not like to look at the figures, but from what I can tell, yeah, generally good in that space. But again, with all of this, it's about continuous improvement, you know, and how do we engage more people in the competition of all ages and genders. And
yeah, I think that's something that I've definitely noticed from going to games, you know, even back when it was the Premiership was the top level, is the last 5 years the demographic does seem to be starting to flip, at least. You know, yes, there's still a large older demographic of sort of 50 and above, but then also you've got sort of children coming through. I think it's great to see the likes of, you know, Evervale have brought back their sort of mini and junior section, Bridgend, with sort of the college and sort of how they're sort of working with sort of their relationship. It's great to see the clubs developing that and sort of using their sort of mini and juniors, their youth teams to sort of, when you're bringing on players, obviously we've seen a great example, Harry Rees-Weldon. You know, he's been brought out of Evervale sort of youth, gets the academy contract, he's playing as a senior player with Evervale, but also gets his pro debut now over the weekend, and you know, he's probably going to start transitioning through after some success with the under-20s as well. So it's definitely, I think, stepping in the right direction, which I think, you know, in a time that's difficult for Welsh rugby on a whole, you know, even at a test sort of level in terms of filling the stadium out and sort of who the demographic are, certainly is a good sign that there's still plenty of young people involved, and sort of, as bad as it is for Welsh sport, it'll be very interesting to see how the demographic changes, if it does at all. Around obviously Cardiff City relegated from the Championship, how that sort of changes things. Obviously the rise of football the last 20 years or so, as you know, in South Wales, has definitely sort of hindered, you know, Welsh rugby's progress in terms of the crowds.
Well, I think you mean Harry's a great example, and one of the hopefully the benefits of having a competition, ambitious, aspirational, exciting competition that is a blend of youth and experience, and that was kind of one of the key principles again at the start of the whole project. You know, we debated to a great extent. You know, is regional A teams, is that the solution? An under-21s league, is that the solution? And we felt actually on balance the best solution is this blend of age, of experience and youth. So you get examples of Adam Lauren playing alongside Max Page. You know, and then obviously Max has gone on to bigger and big things now, but Adam's sort of towards the tail end of his career, but a seasoned professional rugby player. That's a kind of nice little example. And then you've got young players like Harry Rees-Weldon coming through, and you'd hope that you know, young people are probably most interested in their peers. You know, all the peers who are just ahead of them. You know, and when you get to see, well, okay, let's go down and watch Harry this weekend, and we know also that young people are more interested in personalities and individuals, maybe more so than sort of teams, which might have been the case a long time ago, or certainly a blend of the two. You know, so go and watch Harry this weekend, or go and watch, although I think a similar example at Pontypool with Hugh Anderson, it looks like he's probably transitioned now anyway, but go and watch Hugh. You know, he's only 4 years older than me, and he's carving up the SRC, and again, like Harry's made his pro debut, you know, has sort of made a bit of a mark, come out of the back of 20s, and there's good examples of all of those. Dylan Kelleher, Griffiths again at Pontypool, transition now sort of more firmly into the pro game with the Dragons, but you know, got a lot of his apprenticeship and schooling through. Granted, it was the Prem in previous years, but the SRC this year. And great for everyone. Back to Harry Rees, great for Evervale. You know, he's a local boy, and that core principle of players being able to play for their hometown club. Because if they do move on, and that was something I noticed when I was working in New Zealand, that even the All Blacks generally retained a really strong relationship to their original club. You know, and you had instances at times of where the All Blacks season had finished, and Dan Carter would turn out for, you know, his local club. Yeah. And whilst I don't know whether we'll ever see that, I think the times have sort of moved forward even more now, but that's really important for someone like Harry, to be able to play for Ebbw and wherever he goes on to next, he'll always have those roots.
And it's, one thing that's definitely, I don't know if you have any data on it, but that has seemed to have improved this season is we've seen more young players step up for that debut. Harry Rees-Well and Hugh Anderson, Dylan Keller-Griffiths, Max Page, all of these sort of players are stepping up and sort of making their pro debut. Obviously then the likes of across the last couple of seasons, we saw Joe Hawkins play for Swansea in the autumn, and so he went up to play for Wales in the spring, and sort of a similar scale with Ennis Mee with Llandovery. He's played with Llandovery this season. He's also played with the Scarlets, and now he's been capped for Wales, and looks like he'll be capped for Wales sort of plenty more. Is that something that's on the rise? Is those sort of players that are transitioning and making their pro debut, has that increased at all this season, do you know?
I don't know if it's necessarily increased, but we have got some really neat examples. You could probably pick a player across almost virtually all of the teams in the competition. Steph Emanuel playing for Cardiff. You've got Tom Florence at Bridgend. I'm only naming a couple off the top of my head. There'll be people I miss who are sort of shifting between Matchday 23 and the URC back to SRC. Might get a start. So we are certainly seeing those good examples, which you hope that kind of if you can see it, you can be it sort of thing for young people. Okay, well I can see it here because I'm watching these players play at Bridgend week in, week out, and now they're playing for the Ospreys, or watching guys at Ebbw now playing for the Dragons. So I think the big thing for us from a competition perspective is to make a big song and dance about those examples and some really neat player case studies. I think the sort of challenges at the senior pro level regarding squad size has probably maybe accelerated it, but sometimes that's a good thing. It kind of forces your hand. If you're in doubt with a young player and say, okay, well, are they ready yet? Or I'll probably err on the side of caution and no, they're not. Well, in fact, actually, give Hugh Anderson a chance and he scores, possibly what is Dragons' best try of the season up in Newcastle. He's still the same player. 2 weeks ago, he was playing in SRC. So it does force a hand a bit, but there's definitely an appetite amongst our pro coaches to give experience to young players. And we still are seeing more of that opportunity being given. Mark Jones at the Ospreys and Philo at the Dragons, and obviously Jockey at Cardiff and Peely in the Scarlets. So it would be something that we're definitely tracking. But a lot of the time, I suppose players' journeys are quite individual as well. And positionally too. We always know that backs tend to transition a bit sooner and a bit younger than forwards, and you could probably break the forwards down again in terms of when they mature and when they're able to make that step up again, whether that's from age grade to SRC to URC, whether that's pro URC to international rugby. But for some players, the journey can be quite quick. Ellis Mee's a good example. Hawks was another good example.
And I guess that's the good thing about the way the season has sort of worked is, a 10-team playoff at the end of the season seems unusual to a lot of people, and sort of it's probably one of those ones. Some people, it's like Marmite, some people love it, some people will sort of hate it, and obviously it'll, we've got 3 rounds yet to go before anyone can make a true judgment on sort of how successful it has been. But obviously, is that sort of plan to end the season set to stay, and sort of is that what the aim was, to sort of give a bit of added jeopardy for especially the young players who may not be used to it playing the same level of rugby but without that sort of added jeopardy?
Yeah, 100%. That was definitely one of the driving principles around the design of the post-season. Obviously the league rewards consistency, week in, week out, but if you trip up in the league during the middle of the season, we've always got next week. And we look at sort of what will it take for Wales to win the World Cup? Well, they've got to beat, arguably, it'll be the 3 biggest teams back to back to back. So how do we create opportunities where players can get that experience in different ways throughout their journey? And we were, finding, obviously, Junior World Cup's another good example. Players would go in there, and sometimes it might have been the first big jeopardy game they played in. The cup provides an element of jeopardy, slightly different again. Now we've got the sort of post-season with the main SRC and wildcard games. And I spoke to a coach, one of the head coaches of one of the clubs last week, and was chatting to them about the sort of post-season structure. And he said, I really like it because from a coaching perspective, every game counts.
Yeah.
And for players' perspective, every game counts. So that stuff you learn, you know, if it doesn't work out for you in this game, you know, and it didn't for Swansea last week, it very nearly did, but it didn't. There's a lot of coachable moments in that coming away. Okay, so next time it might be a URC playoff for you, but you've been here before. It's not the first time. You've experienced that level of jeopardy, that level of pressure, the clock going down, you're chasing points or you're trying to hold a lead. What do you do? And that being critical for decision-making positions like 10, 9, you know, how do they control the game? How do they close out a game? You know, where there isn't next week. So that's all part of the design.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've certainly noticed is obviously it keeps all the teams interested. Obviously, if there was no relegation but there was just a top 4 playoff, the sides at the bottom, they change their directives, the narratives around, you know, do they develop players, how do they sort of manage this in minutes. But certainly since Christmas, it feels like the sort of the league has sort of shrunk in terms of the gap between the top and the bottom. Obviously, Swansea didn't have any wins before the game with Aberavon at sort of New Year, and have gone on to win, I think there's 6 games across all the competitions since, and have closed the gap. We've seen RGC on a good run, Carmarthen, obviously Bridgend as well, so Aberavon have pushed up the table. So it certainly feels that, you know, having that 7th and 8th spot at home just drives on that sort of every team to try and get there. All of a sudden you think, well, I can get into the top 6 and play one less game of rugby. So there's always something, obviously, the likes of Pontypool are sort of in the middle, then chasing that top 4 for a home quarter final, and then obviously top 2 for the home semi-final, and obviously the home final for whoever can finish first. So it's certainly from an outwards perspective looking in, it's definitely added that sort of added the jeopardy, but increased the quality in terms of what we're seeing, and obviously the attacking rugby then coming off the additional 6 point sort of bonus point coming in. So I think definitely from what we've seen this first year is, whilst it may seem a bit of an orange in a barrel of apples, it's actually a bit of method to the madness. Like you said, it replicates a sort of a World Cup run, and ultimately it's actually improving the sort of the standard of the league across not the 12 months but the 8 months that we sort of see action. So I think that's the important thing, is we're seeing duplication of what we will see in years to come, you know, at sort of a senior level, but also it's improving games for those who are going. Like I said, there's not been many blowouts this season. You know, even with the 6 pointers, we've seen high scoring games. I think that's key for sort of fan retention, both the online spectators wanting to sort of buy into the league and sort of spend their Thursday evening watching an additional game of rugby. And is that something that you're going to look to keep with SRC? Is that Thursday slot?
Yeah, I mean, and as part of our agreement, they do sort of set the schedule, and they'll be set by their hierarchy of things, whether that's URC or international rugby, etc. And they'll work to when they get to SRC. And they always talked about the weekend of rugby starts on Thursday night, and that was kind of, so you go SRC on Thursday, URC on a Friday, URC on a Saturday, etc. So we haven't had any discussions around placement for next season, but that was sort of how it was set up this year. But I think back to your point, I mean, one thing that's been really pleasing for me is, you know, where if games are close, if games are competitive, if there's upsets here and there that buck the trend, you know, that's why we're involved in rugby and sport. Like if we could predict it, we probably wouldn't find it as interesting. So, you know, the sort of bottom 5 teams fighting out over the last, you know, 6-7 weeks has been great. I mean, the atmosphere at Bridgend was electric last Thursday night, you know, and that's exactly what we want to see. You know, the players raise their game, the coaches raise their game. I mean, I think there was an element, certainly through the back end of the regular season, of people not wanting to draw RGC away in the playoffs. So I think that probably drove a lot of effort and motivation. But no, I mean, that's exactly what we want the competition to be about.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, we've had it all laid out now. What sort of game are you looking to go to now this weekend? And so what are you looking forward to now? What these sort of clashes? Obviously, there's some tasty ties out there. Do we see any upsets?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Like, I mean, as a purist, from a competition perspective, upsets are always great. And obviously not great if you're in the team that the favourite that doesn't win. But yeah, I mean, we've got Aberavon Newport on the weekend, we've got Ebervale Quins, we've got Cardiff Bridgend, you know, like everybody tends to raise their game when they come to the capital to make a point. So Bridgend from chatting to Scott Baldwin last week, like they are fired up for this, you know. and obviously Llandovery Pontypool. You know, like in the league, in the table there is not too much between them. But Llandovery at home are on their sort of on their bowling green pitch, you know, playing the style of rugby they play. But then again, you know, Pontypool can throw the ball around too. So I wouldn't like to pick it. I mean, if you're going on form through the regular season, then there was obviously a couple of standouts in yourselves and Cardiff from a consistency point of view. But you know, it's into finals rugby now, and you know, anything can happen. So as long as there's 4 exciting games, that gives us a really exciting draw for the semi, and then we'll see where we get to.
Which one are you going to be heading down to?
This weekend?
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best to get to Llandovery Pontypool, and then depending on the following weekend and scheduling, I'll probably try and get to both semis, and then we're into the finals. I've got a little bit of planning to do for the final. A bit of the icing on the cake in terms of it being a sort of final spectacle, etc. So a little bit of planning to do and chasing up a few things this week to get that ready. But and then I suppose there'll be a bit of a gap in our lives for a bit of time. And then we're into, from my perspective, we're into preparation for the Under-20s World Cup. So we've got 2 games pre-World Cup, one against England at Pontypool, which again is great, you know, and we've been trying to work with our 10 SRC clubs around using their facilities, working with them to showcase age-grade rugby. Wales 19s played at Aberavon the other week. We got our second Under-20s World Cup warm game against Italy, and then we're going to Italy for the Junior World Cup, where we'll see lots of the players who featured in the SRC this season. You know, going into that, you know, looking to make a statement. You know, and hopefully lots of those players will be involved in these last 2 or 3 rounds, and we'll get that Jeopardy playoff final type. You know, every minute in the 80 matters. You know, because there isn't next week, 100%. And that'll feed them. That'll bode well for their preparation into the Junior World Cup.
100%. John, pleasure as always. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Hopefully, except we'll see 4 great games this weekend. Obviously, the sun is now out, so we should see some decent crowds, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, well, Rob, thank you for the conversation. It's really great to talk to you about this stuff. And I suppose just to finish off, I just want to make a massive thanks to you and your colleagues in terms of the way that you've got behind the competition, the way you promote it, the way you celebrate it. You know, the podcast is great. You know, I think it kind of it brings dialogue and interest and intrigue about what's going on a weekly basis. So yeah, thanks for everything you do.
No problem. I think that's the game is, you know, we just try and push the league.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah.
Cheers, John.
That was the Super Rugby Cymru podcast. Please rate, review and share us on socials if you can, and join us again next week for more of the same. And until then, enjoy your rugby.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.